Hello. Hello, hello. What's up? Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome one and all.
Hi, Herman. Always good to see you.
Hey, Herman.
Herman can't get away from me.
Yes. It's like, hey, where are those assets I asked for?
I know. Again, Discord pings from Herman just not 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, everyone. Are we ready to begin?
I think so.
Feeling good?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, welcome UC Santa Cruz students. We thank you for tuning in this evening to Design Your Future Production Track. The primary goal of this event is to inspire you all on what you can do with your degree, and there are many roles in the industry, and this event will help you find your path. So my name is Taylor Nagel. I'm the events coordinator for the Career Success Team at UC Santa Cruz. And this program is offered in collaboration with the Career Success Team and the AGPM program housed in the Arts Division. And this is a part of our first ever Games Career Explorations events. We're bringing Games alumni to you all virtually to share their career journeys and experiences. So before we jump in to meet with the alumni, I want to provide you some Zoom meeting logistics. We are recording this session, except for the breakout rooms. We ask that all attendees stay on mute until directed otherwise. And please submit all the questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen to the co-hosts, Sophia or Christina, and they will help filter the questions to Juan later in the program. And then here is a quick breakdown of our program today. We will have alumni panel discussion for about 45 minutes, a Q&A for about 15, and then break you into breakout rooms to have further and in-depth discussions with our alumni, and then we will close. So without further ado, here's Juan, the AGPM undergraduate advisor.
What's up, y'all? Tis I. So hi, everyone. My name is Juan Morales Rocha. I am the art and design, games and playable media undergrad advisor. I'm also an alumni of the program, and the folks that are here today are some good friends of mine that also graduated from the AGPM program. I'll let them, introduce themselves in a little bit. But yeah, essentially with this event, right, we wanted to bring some awesome folks that have gone through the program just so you could see, what sort of work that they're doing. Very, people who came literally from the program that you're currently pursuing or similar games here at UCSC, and seeing what you're able to do with the, the classes that you're taking, what sort of, extracurriculars that you're doing, and how that's going to propel you in your career in the future. So without further ado, I guess I'll just let y'all introduce yourselves. Whoever wants to start, feel free.
You should direct us so we don't interrupt each other.
Jake, I direct you. Please go ahead and start. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jake Widener, he, him. I graduated with a double major from AGPM and film and digital media in 2018, and now work as a producer at Phenomena, which is an indie game studio based out of San Francisco. And you might also know that Robin, the head of AGPM, is also our CEO.
Sure, awesome, thank you. Alyssa?
Hello, my name is Alyssa. I graduated from UCSC in 2017. Time is weird and I've forgotten the year sometimes. I actually graduated with Juan and also Daniel here as part of the first tiny little group, the guinea pigs of the AGPM program.
That's right.
And I am currently an associate outsourcing producer at 2K.
Awesome, thank you. And Daniel?
Yeah, my name is Daniel Chamberlain, he, him, and I graduated in 2017, as Alyssa said. And I currently work as a technical producer at Pixelbray Studios based in Mountain View, and we work on mobile games.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming again. Very grateful to have my game buds come through so they could talk to the rest of y'all. So I guess, we'll go ahead and dive in right to the first question. So I guess, since we started with Jake, we'll give you the first one. So the first question, please tell us about your journey, your major. You told us a little bit about that, student life, first jobs and internships that you might have had, and then your job in games today.
Great. Yeah, so I think I've pretty much always been really interested in how teams come together to make art. I followed a lot of different passions and different mediums, eventually ending up in games, but I've always experimented with a lot of different mediums. Kind of started in high school, taking on, kind of a creative leadership role in basically all of our school's extracurricular clubs. Like I was an editor for a yearbook, put out 2 award-winning yearbooks, worked as a producer for our school musicals, did a couple feature films with some friends like during summers. So just have always been like just chasing weird creative projects that I can do with friends. So I started developing some professional experience with a summer internship with like a local media company up in San Rafael, or they're based out of San Francisco, but I was living in San Rafael at the time, North Bay, and kind of, I was doing production assistance for local media companies and kind of developed those skills into working freelance that I did throughout high school and college for Bay Area-based tech companies. When I came into UC Santa Cruz, I was studying film digital media to start, but I knew I was kind of starting to lean towards digital mediums, and I was taking a bunch of animation classes and eventually game studies classes, and I found them really interesting. So that's when I started to explore the AGPM track. I was already halfway done with my film major, so I just decided to double major and try and do both of them. I don't know if that was the right choice after the fact. I really loved all of those classes. Like I'm somebody who always adds too much to my plate, for better or worse. So I was double majoring, trying to get it all done in 4 years because I really didn't want to rack a bunch of debt, had some pressure from parents. So I was needing some more money. And then I started working with Juan actually at ITS as a student technician, and I was doing a good job there, kind of leading the teams. Eventually was promoted to lead. So it was some more professional kind of management experience in a technical field. Was enjoying all of my AGPM and film classes, but I was definitely starting to get pretty overworked and exhausted. So I definitely wouldn't recommend overloading yourself. I think that's the biggest lesson that I've learned throughout my journey, is now years later, finally having my dream job, like every day is exhausting. I have lots of like medical and mental health problems as a result of not sleeping. So keep an eye on that. But as a result of taking on so much, I developed a lot of practical production experience. And then at GDC my senior year, I luckily got to meet up with some of the production team at Phenomena, just coincidentally. After talking to them, having a bunch of conversations with the party, they realized they were looking for some production support. And it was nice to have Robin to put in a good word. And then throughout the rest of my senior year, I was going through a long and kind of arduous interview process. It was definitely anxiety filled. But I think with all of that practical experience, I was really able to communicate with nuance, that I knew how to manage conflicts and creative collaboration, iteration across a bunch of different challenges, and was eventually hired after I graduated. And now I've been working there for 2 years doing creative production, which includes project management, design, publishing, QA, and communications for the studio as a whole. So I also manage all of our social media and outgoing public communications and going to events.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate that. All right. Next up, Alyssa. Do you want me to repeat the question, by the way? Or you got it?
My life story.
Yes. Basically.
Okay. I even took notes because my brain is goo since quarantine happened.
Oh yeah, I definitely wrote a lot and condensed.
So I started my journey, I guess, when I was a freshman in college. I really wanted to make games for a living. I realized it when I was almost through high school, after going through a really STEM-heavy program that was really intense. I was like, nah, this ain't for me. And I kind of like swung all the way to the other side, extreme pendulum moment. And I was like, I want to make video games. I want to make art for video games. I'm going to be an art student. So I went to Santa Cruz. The AGPM program did not exist. I'm sure people are aware it's still very new. And I talked to some different departments like computer science and fine art. And both of them told me, if you know you hate programming, which I do, please go and be an art major instead, and you can work on senior games as part of that. So I did that. However, I realized quickly that there are not a lot of, well, back then, there weren't a lot of opportunities to work on games if you weren't in the computer science major. So it's either you learn a lot of programming and then you get to make a game, or you're kind of treated as like a higher on in one random elective class that you can't take until you're a junior. And the experiences were just all over the place, depending on what kind of team you joined. But it was frustrating because I would see a lot of artists who were very talented and kind people go and try this out. And some of them were really passionate about, and some of them just wanted to see what it was like to make art for games. But some of the team dynamics were not very pretty. There wasn't a lot of respect. There wasn't a lot of communication. And I saw some really nice, pure artist people. They would just cry in class. It was just horrible because they weren't being respected by their team. And that, along with the lack of other ways to be more involved in the games community at UCSC, I got kind of fed up and I had my mid-college crisis. And I was like, what am I paying for? So I like started a club. You guys might know it's GDA Collab, the Game Design Art Collaboration. And this was like in 2015, which seems forever ago, but it's really not. And at the same time I was founding this club with some of my friends, I heard rumblings about the new program and Robin being hired to lead that. So I started bugging everybody, like my professors. I started bugging like my art advisor. Hey, how do I switch my major? Hey, how do I switch my major? But I was already a junior, so it was kind of late in the game to be doing that. And I got lucky in that a lot of the classes I took were being like required for it, but I had already taken them. So I managed to kind of like squeeze my way in there, but I did have to stay for a 5th year. I stuck with GDA until I graduated, and I'm like super proud of everything that they're still going. We turned 5. It's crazy. And then after college, I got my first job in QA for a large tech company. And I started about 2 days after I graduated because I knew a friend who was hired earlier, and she was like, oh, they're looking for more people. So I got really lucky, and that job freaking sucked. It was terrible. And it wasn't really the job itself. It was just a combination of things like commuting and some of the way that management was, managing people. But I was pretty miserable. I was just saving up money, working on my portfolio because I still wanted to do art for games back then. And I had another friend from school who was working on a gamified app for NASA, and he kind of recruited me and some other friends from school to help with that. And that was like a part-time job. And then, this is wild, I guess, maybe, my parents moved to Washington, which means I moved to Washington State, just because of a job change. So I was lucky enough to be able to work remotely for my NASA thing, work on my portfolio from home, and save up money. My parents were like, you need to get a real job and work in retail or something. So I got a job. I worked at Home Depot for like half a year, you guys. And I was feeling really isolated up there. Like life was good and everything. I was being, I was comfortable. I was saving my money, working on stuff, but it was very isolating. I think we all can kind of relate to that now. And I decided, job or not, because I am applying, I'm just going to move back into the scene. And if all else fails, I was lucky enough to have grandparents that live like south San Jose. So better than Washington State. So I was preparing to just make the jump. But before that, same friend from the tech company who now worked at a different company was like, they're hiring here. So I interviewed there, and I got a case analyst position for a medical software startup, 3D modeling people's coronary arteries. Very random. Sort of like QA, but better, more interesting. I get to look at people's insides. And I worked there until I got laid off in August of last year. And in 2 months, I went into crazy mode, and I did a lot of life design exercises, and I realized maybe I should try out production. I love art and I'll always be an artist, but it kind of burns me out when I'm setting like my income and my living resting on this. So I started applying to a bunch of production jobs, and I actually got my 2K job from a cold app online. It can be done. it's very lucky, right place, right time for sure. But I honestly forgot the role when I got an email back. I was like, which one was this? Oh my God. They didn't say it in the email. I was like, oh no. Yes, hello, the role. I'd love to apply to that. But I've been working there since October and it's been really cool. I've been learning a lot, and that is my, hopefully I didn't ramble too much, my story.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate that. All right, Daniel, do you need me to repeat the question or you got this?
I got it.
Awesome. Thank you.
For me, I started at Santa Cruz in 2014 or so, and like Alyssa said, the AGPM major did not exist back then. So I was a film major. There was actually a secret major back then. I think still exists, but it's like there were like only 10 people allowed in it. But it was where you could be a film major and a game major at the same time. So that was my ambition, because I didn't think I could code or any of that stuff. But then I learned I actually could code, which was surprising. But then also the AGPM major started to form, and then with like Alyssa, I decided I wanted to pursue that and go for that major. But at that time, you couldn't be in the 170 program, and you couldn't pitch a project unless you were in the CS degree. So I went to Jim Whitehead at the time, and I told him I want to be in the CS 170 major. And he was like, you don't have any of these programming classes or any of these math classes, you need to do it. And I'm like, I don't care. And then I went in the class, and then I was able to practice alongside that, be a secret agent for my fellow artists in ArtG 118 at the time, tell them how things were going on. And eventually, the 170 game I worked on did really well that year. And then through my stuff in senior year, I was also a part of GDA. From nearly the very beginning, and that played a huge role in my production skills and where that came from. I didn't realize until much later that a lot of the stuff I was doing as a officer in GDA was managing projects and managing people and thinking about schedule and that kind of stuff. And then I was also an RA on campus. So I was an RA at Kresge College, and that is a lot of people skills and a lot of dealing with really stressful situations, which does apply a lot in my job nowadays. But after my voice. After graduation, Elizabeth Swenson. Oh my God, my voice.
Get some water. Don't worry.
Yeah,
take your time.
Elizabeth Swenson had a connection for me to one of her friends at a internship at 505 Games down in Calabasas, which was pretty close to where I grew up. So I applied for that. I was lucky enough to get it, and it was a production internship at a game studio. So I was super, super lucky for that. But then after 3 months of working the job, it was very good pay. It was, I was pretty good at the job, and the job was going well, but I found that I really, really did despise the job. I despised living back in Calabasas area, and I just did not connect with the job. It was a game publishing job is very different from a game development production job. In the sense that you're often very disconnected from the teams that are working on this stuff, and you're often the one writing their checks rather than being the person actually making the stuff and worrying about how you're going to make this game good. So it was a really good learning opportunity and a great foot in the door to the industry, but I felt like I had to change. So I, similarly to Alyssa, I just said, I'm moving to San Jose. And I just moved there without a job. And hope I would find something. I worked as a barista at Starbucks for about 6 months. I worked odd jobs. I worked for a bit doing contract work for a VR company in San Francisco. I would get up at 5 in the morning and drive there, work for 2 hours, then drive to Starbucks to work my barista job. And I share that just to know that it's even if after college, you may not have the clean road from degree to job in your field. You may have the step at Home Depot or Starbucks or wherever else that may be in between. But thankfully, just over 2 years ago now, I was able to get a job where I'm at now at Pixelbrace Studios. But I pretty much cold applied for that one, but also the hiring manager for the job I applied for was good friends with Juan. And so I was able to use some connections there and then able to get an interview that eventually led to a job. And been doing that for 2 years now.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that. So that's question one. Thanks, y'all. Very insightful answers. All right, question two, we'll take it back to Jake. So question number two, what was a class or experience as a student that was valuable to you for your future career? I think you know, you all touched on this a little bit, but if there's something in particular, like a particular faculty member or a club, GDA, or what was like, and then what are the biggest differences between making games in school versus making games in the industry? So Jake, take it away.
Yeah, there's definitely no shortage of good examples and good mentors at Santa Cruz. I think the obvious one to start with is just 170, like having a big long-term production that you get to treat as a professional experience and actually doing so. Trying to lead my team with commitment and compassion and trying to learn how to work through creative conflict and longer-term iteration on games specifically, because I was still figuring out that medium a bit more. That was huge. Another really big one for me was helping form with Juan and some other friends, a local diversity in games organization, meeting some other like-minded, caring people, and just talking about our shared appreciation for unique games and the people that make them, and just really talking through our concerns. Like, honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to stick with games after my first year. Like, I had a lot of experiences of like pretty toxic classrooms and like just people making snide comments and just stuff that made me uncomfortable. But after forming this org and kind of talking through issues and just meeting more like-minded people, like I really figured or found that working in games with good people was the place I wanted to be. So yeah, that was really great. I think having a wide variety of mentorship too, since I was interested in all these different mediums, like basically my closest three were Susanna Ruiz in the film and like animation department. Like, she was my kind of primary mentor throughout school, like just getting a kind of a varied perspective, since she has some experience with like Games for Change and working with different advocacy organizations. That was something that was important to me, and I always kind of want to balance the line of like mainstream accessibility and visible games, but also try to do something that's maybe a little bit more thoughtful and also participate in advocacy organizations. So that was great mentorship. I was interested in like journalism as well, and maybe academia, so I spent a lot of time working with Soraya Murray. Did independent study with her, helping her publish her latest book by doing some like media capture in different games, and just seeing that process and getting to meet some folks from like Polygon and just hearing what that career was like definitely helped kind of me know that I wanted to focus in development first off, and then maybe kind of work those writing elements into my career longer term. And then Robin at the head of the program, and she was a bit more accessible at the time. That was definitely helpful to have someone who was like in the heat of it, making Luna and Watan, these big new indie games, and hearing how that production goes and sharing my vulnerabilities about how I felt about the industry and where I was on my games. That was definitely super useful. I think the biggest differences between the student environment and the professional environment are the managed feeling of uncertainty and confidence in that ability to navigate the uncertainty that only really comes from experience. There's a recognition from everybody on the team that everything is going to be hard. There's like no set perfect process to make a new game. There's no like most of the time you're developing all the systems from scratch, or even if you're reusing systems that are known, like you're developing new content, and that always has a bunch of unknowns. So it's just going to be discovery and compromise the whole way. I think the timeline differences are another one. Like 170 it feels like a year, but it's really like 30 weeks of a third, not even half time, like a third time work in a best case scenario if you only have 3 classes every quarter. So it's kind of deceptively a short amount of time compared to full time for even a few months. So just having the ability to account for more buffers and multiple iterations of design and cuts to the project. And sometimes there's short and rush projects in the industry as well, but there's always this balance of estimating what you think you can handle and threading the needle between all of that takes a lot of finesse, and nobody really does it perfectly. So that's why things are still stressful even when you're professional.
For sure. Thank you, Jake. All right, Alyssa, go for it.
Well, I think my biggie, obviously, for experiences at school that helped me a lot was starting GDA. And I was kind of stubborn about it, especially in the beginning when I was very frustrated with the state of my opportunities and by extension, all of my peers' opportunities that weren't programmers. So there was a very long period of time where I kind of was very adamant about like, we can do it ourselves. we have everything we need. We have a community. We can pull together a game and teach ourselves and learn as we go, and kind of thing. I'm like, we don't need the school. And a lot of that is true. You have a lot of power together to learn and to boost each other up and support each other and create the things you want to do and learn the things you want to learn. But also, it's really important to remember that faculty is there to support you, and they're always looking for more resources to support you. And it's totally valuable and a thing for you to go and ask people for advice, even if you're not even in any of their classes. You can just bother them, go to their office hours, email them and say like, hey, I just want to talk about how I'm doing with my program, and is it all right if we chat about your story or the questions I might have about the industry? It's totally, most people are there to help you, like they have you in your best interest. So that's definitely a thing as well. And it's kind of like a balance of how much can I go out and is this valuable if I just try to wing it on my own with my friends, because there's a lot of value in that. But also there are people there that have a ton of experience that are definitely interested in helping you as well. And I do want to give like a big shout out to Ed Greger, who teaches 118. I took that class 7 quarters and they all counted because I worked on a different game every time. And that was the main class that I had before AGPM was a thing. I don't know, I think it's still there. But having Ed as a pseudo mentor in my case was really valuable for me, just to see another like a weathered artist from the industry come in and care a lot about the students, particularly the artists when they didn't have a lot of support or really any formal support before. His classroom was like a little haven for us, and we could say like, I'm in a weird situation with my team where this is happening, what do I do? And he would give really good advice. But also he taught us, one of the most important takeaways for me at least was, you shouldn't take any crap from your team. You know, there's a certain point, everybody's stressed, everyone's working hard, and that's part of making a project together a lot of the time. But there's a point where it's like the respect and the communication always have to be there. And if somebody is not going to respect you, you can stand up for yourself. And you're allowed to stand up for yourself, and you should. And I really, really appreciated that attitude from somebody. He was really willing to go out on the line to protect us in some ways when we felt like we weren't being listened to as a group before we had our own program. So that was really cool. And he also supported me when I started GDA. So I think that was my favorite class, but also my most valuable experience from the program.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. Daniel?
Yeah, for me, I'll echo that GDA was huge for me. I think for a producer, your kind of bread and butter is just the experience of working on projects that ship, and ship in any form or another. I think for me, when I first came onto my job, it was being able to think about some game that I worked on that had X, Y, or Z experience. It had some team member who was similar, who had difficulties working on the project, or some kind of schedule, or some kind of technical issue, or some kind of design, but some kind of parallel that I could use as an example for how best to solve these problems. You just need examples and you just need experience. So GDA is a great way to get experience working with teams and doing that. And especially when GDA can be rather large teams, managing large teams of people and trying to find stuff for them all to do is kind of often what you're doing as a producer now, for me at least, and trying to make sure that everyone's working on the right stuff. They know what they need to do. They have the tools to get that done. They're not blocked in any of that stuff. That's the kind of, and then making sure that all comes together into a cohesive thing. That's like what I need to do on a daily basis. And so I think anything in school that can get towards that is what you want to aim for. Just find ways to make stuff. And that can be any classes that let you make a project with a team. That's going to get super valuable production experience. I think too, it was the flexibility and having to work on lots of projects at the same time. And this is me from my experience now. I think it's going to be different for both Lissa and Jake, but I work at a company where we are shipping a new product every month. We're a live game, so we constantly have new stuff. Like I have a product shipping this month, the next, and the month after, and those are all different teams. So working with all of those teams and keeping them up and making sure they hit all their deadlines when they're in different stages of development is tough. So I think, especially with GDA and being an officer there, it was managing several different projects at the same time and keeping their various needs in mind. Because if you're managing one project, that can become your whole world, and that's super tough to do even on its own. But a lot of companies are looking for producers who can manage lots of different projects. So having that in arsenal will be super good. As far as difference between the school and industry, it'll vary. I know Alyssa is working at like a very large conglomerate company, and Jake is working at a smaller indie company, and I'm working like somewhere in the middle where we have about like 150 people, something like that. But I think a big thing you'll see as a difference is the scale, as Jake said, as well as scale of money and scale of importance. When you're making something as a student, you're making it for yourself or for your class, and it's like if you mess up, it's like you messed up, not much happens. But getting a stern talking to from the CEO is never fun. Whenever that happens, and I think too, it's that realizing there's a lot more levels of bureaucracy and company and office there. A lot of things move super slowly now, and it's going to be like if you want to institute a change for school, that was just having a meeting with the team. All right, guys, let's do it differently now. At a office, it's now, all right, can I schedule a meeting with these 5 people and get them on board? And one person just doesn't like that idea, and then you just can't do anything forward with that. I often find that I'm battling people's egos and battling other people's ideas, and not one person's always right in that situation, but so often of my job is just convincing people of stuff, and having to not just do my work, but also convince people of the work we should be doing as a company. So that for me as a producer is a big part of the job, and a big thing that's just not really there as much as a student.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Thank y'all. All right. Question number three. How did you move past your initial fears of interacting with professionals in your field and begin to build relationships with your network or within your network? Jake, go for it.
Great. Yeah, I think a lot of it was just like showing my enthusiasm and appreciation for the respect that honestly a lot of developers are actually willing to give to students. It always seems like a major concern, and maybe there's frequently enough people will brush you off, but when people are willing to give you your time, just like taking that really seriously and appreciating it. A big one for me that I think is my number one piece of advice for people trying to network and trying to learn more is learn how to ask really good questions. Like I think that has led me further than almost anything else. Like do some research on your own to know kind of the basics of the profession, like what the day-to-day is like, what the kind of concerns that producers have typically, or any discipline if you're kind of speccing into multiple, and then ask interesting ones that really only that person might be able to answer, someone only with that level of experience. Speak to their specialties and their experience, and that'll often lead to a lot more conversation, or at least more interesting ones. So I think with that as well, like join groups that discuss things that you care about in the industry. Like that's been one of my favorite things since joining is just like we have a game design book club that we do with Double Fine and some other local indies where it's like, oh, we just play a game every month and then meet up to talk about it. Now it's on Zoom, but just having ongoing like group discussions where you get to disagree in a super low stakes setting or like vent about things that are frustrating you that is kind of outside of your specific teams. And then, just spend as much time as you're comfortable like socializing with new people, and friendships will develop. You just need to respect people's boundaries and talk to people of all skill levels, like talk to other students that are maybe even younger than you that you feel like you might be able to lend a hand to. And the closer people are to your experience level, honestly, the easier that conversation will likely be, like just kind of sharing strategies, sharing things that you've learned, talking about good opportunities. And then once you have a broad but meaningful network, then you'll just hear about more opportunities and more ways of getting to know more people. It all kind of categories together. And that all helps out and makes it a lot easier in the long run.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. Go for it, Alyssa.
So I'm going to echo part of what Jake said about people around your age. They're your peers, and together you're the future of this medium, this industry. And I know you might feel pressure to find some really impressive looking mentor to guide you and give you all the answers. But don't forget to support your fellow peers, because you're growing together. And I like to say, like, my friends' successes are also my successes. And I know it's corny, but it's super true, because together we can do so much more than any one person on their own could do. And it's just so exciting and fulfilling to see people that you've grown up with and remember making your first really poopy game together that doesn't really work. Just like succeed and like blossom into these really cool, creative people making these awesome projects all the time. And remember that you're a part of that community. And as far as networking goes, like with people you don't know who might be a little older or more experienced, my number one piece of advice is just to remember that they're just people. You know, even if they're like the CEO of your dream company, right? It's also just a person, and they're just like you. So approach your conversations. It's just like connecting to another human, and absolutely be enthusiastic and interested and excited about what they're about and what you're about, and you're gonna know pretty well, like pretty easily, if you're going to hit it off with this person or not. And not everybody just meshes together in the best way, and that's okay. They're just not your people. There is someone for everyone. You know, there are so many different personality types in this industry, and you absolutely can find a space or create your own if you feel like that's not around you right now. And I think yeah, just connecting like regular people, and it's totally okay to just reach out to people you think are cool. Absolutely do your research, like Jake said, so you have better questions to ask. But it's totally fine to say, I think you're super cool and the stuff you do is super cool. I've been kind of interested in this sort of thing. Can I go and buy you a coffee sometime? Well, right now that's harder, but like, can we go get a coffee, and can I hear more about like your story and your journey? And people love to talk about themselves, and if you're like, that's amazing, tell me more, they'll just tell you more, and you could get a lot of wisdom and little tidbits of advice. And you're not really there to get a job, right? Like, people aren't means to an end. You're there to just connect to another person who you think is cool, and your network will like naturally, organically grow, and you're going to organically hear about these new opportunities that come up because people think you're cool and they'll reach out to you about them. But that's how I've been going about this so far, and it seems to be working out okay. And a lot of it is still luck, but I think it's always fun to meet new people who do some interesting stuff, just because I guess that's like an end in itself, right? Just connecting to other people who are into the same things as you.
Definitely. Thank you, Alyssa. All right, Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of the same stuff. I think you can never be too nice to people. Don't ever blow anyone off who's also wants to work in games or is working in games. Like, they're going to be your colleagues. They're going to be the people that are there. Having a strong network is having a lot of people who can vouch for you and say that I've worked with them, or I've known them for a long time and I trust them. I recommend them for this job. As Alyssa said, I think a network is so useful for getting jobs in the game industry when it's such a small industry, and when so many jobs are because you know someone and someone can put in the word for you. But you can't ever really, I think very rarely, go to someone and be like, hey, how can I get a job? Or can you give me a job? It's just, especially for very busy people in the industry, that's not going to be something that really appeals to them. And I think for going up to a professional at a GDC and saying, hey, how can I get a job? It's a good question, but also one that they get all the time. I think the better questions to ask are if you can research on their company, the kind of problems they think they go through, but also just always aim to how do I be better at whatever I want to do. And then these people can get offered great advice at that. And if you're asking the right questions, that's what they'll acknowledge, and they'll think this person's asking all the right questions that I want a junior producer to do, and I have an opening. I'll think about that person, and you're going to get that piece of advice there. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I'd say. Just aim to be the best game developer you can be in any form. Find people who are good at that and working in places you want to work, and just connect with them. Just try to connect with them, and then the jobs and networking will come from there.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you all. All right. Number 4. Tell us about a normal day in your current role. What are the challenges you face? What do you like the most? Jake, take it away.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to go through all of my job responsibilities because there's many of them. And the hardest part about my job is just juggling and context switching all of them. And I think from what I've heard from other junior producers at similar kinds of companies, that's pretty standard in smaller, mid-sized companies hiring junior producers. Like, you're either kind of shadowing someone or juggling everything to just support the company as a whole. So yeah, normal day for me is typically like running a stand-up or scrum meeting to determine my team's tasks and my own, because there's often a lot to prioritize. Then responding to emails and messages to make sure the right people see them and the most time-sensitive questions get answered. Then play the most recent changes from our engineers and review the latest asset drafts from the artists, give feedback on each, and encourage cross-disciplinary meetings and communications as needed, having a close eye or ear out for the problems that I think people might be encountering, even if they're not like bringing them to me, because often the devil's in the details and you kind of have to read between the lines of like what is troubling people on your team. I'll often have meetings with external producers at our partner companies or publishers. I might have to draft design documents or script gameplay content in the engine to make sure that the vision for the game is coming along. Sometimes I meet with our whole production team for the studio to discuss our studio culture, our processes, and our deliverables that are coming up, and how we either have learned something on our individual teams. Since all of our teams are small, our studio is 25 people, but our average team size is like 7. So there's lots of people working on many things and lots of things we can learn from each other. We might need to trade an artist or an engineer. Well, not usually engineers because they need to stay focused in on their singular tasks, but there's a lot of people helping out wherever they can. And then also run playtests and collect notes, just figure out what the game needs, and then give that feedback to the team and kind of filter it. If I'm getting feedback from a lead on the team, they'll fire that off really quickly, and maybe not all of it is relevant or accessible or within scope. So I kind of have to translate that and deliver that feedback to the rest of the team. Or we have a playtester coming in and it's given without context for the rest of the systems in the game, and trying to make sure that it's going to make sense once the more technical people are actually working on it. But realistically, I'll only do half of those at most. And a lot of the challenge is figuring out which half is, or really which quarter is the most important to do that day. And I'm constantly asking for advice. Yeah, I was only recently like bumped up to just a mid-career producer, so now I'm handling that new responsibility and trying to build confidence, and still being very humble and asking what I can do better the whole way. So it's a lot to manage, but it's fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. Go for it, Alyssa.
So I think out of the 3 of us, I'm the one who's newest at being a producer professionally. I don't quite have a super typical day. My company's going through a lot of like internal structural changes right now. So there are a lot of vague or missing procedures that we don't know are missing until we need them. And because of that, I'm doing a lot of random odds and ends. I guess things I do handle on a more day-to-day basis would be like meeting with executive producers to see how progress is going with their projects and where outsourcing can help them, and how we're doing on the things that we've already been working on for them. I also handle a lot of invoicing because we do work with a ton of external vendors for our projects, and everyone needs to be paid on time. I handle our record database, our internal database, and I make sure that's up to date with contracts that are coming in and POs that we're opening for their payments. And I also do things like middleware licensing. I am the middleware team at 2K. And I obviously have the rest of my team to help me out, but we are 3 people, and there's a lot going on. So like Jake, I too have to prioritize out of like all the crazy amount of things that I'm working on right now. What's important right now? Who's waiting on a reply? What is time sensitive? How is this going to affect the bigger picture of where our projects are at? I also am the point of contact for our mocap team. So that's a little bit of a newer thing for me, and that's crazy town right now because you can't really do mocap remotely. So there's a lot of just unknowns that are added on to the regular amount of unknowns. And it's definitely a learning experience for everybody, but I do meet with them regularly to see how they're going, and we do some business strategy things to better streamline their pipeline and their processes. But I think there's always random stuff too that comes up.
For sure.
Yeah, but that's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Listen, Daniel, go for it.
Yeah, there is no typical day for a producer. I think it varies so dramatically. There's things that are consistent. There's your stand-ups. There's your scrums. There's your sprint retros. So I would give a recommendation if you want to go into production, just get the basics on Scrum down. Different CEOs will use it to different degrees, but just know when someone says, we have a retro on this, just know what that means. And a few other things that's kind of hurt me at times where I knew the production basics, but not the production terminology. But regardless, a lot of what my job is answering people's questions and making sure that they are unblocked on stuff. And so that's a constant prioritization act because it's constantly, this person has an urgent question that they're blocked on. And sometimes I just need to tell someone, I'm sorry, I can't get to that right now, but I'm going to note that down and get back to you. And then you need to have a good system of how do you note down the stuff you need to get back to, and note this down to organize other thing and then get back to them. I'm in a meeting right now, so I can't get back to them. But I'm going to have lots of meetings to check in on each of our projects, lots of meetings to get a feature broken down so that the entire team can be on the same page for what the feature is, and we can answer any questions there, and then scope out that feature into a plan on how we're going to create it, what are the various tasks on that, and what's the schedule going to be. I do lots of review on assets and pieces of content as they come through, making sure that it gets to QA at a good quality level. We are a live company, so shipping out stuff constantly. So we need to keep the gears moving, basically, to make sure that we're shipping 5 new chapters every week and making sure that we hit that. So it's a lot of scrambling to make sure we hit that, and then working on stuff that's not going to release until 12 months from now. So it's that prioritization is the constant work of a producer, and the constant, your to-do list is your greatest asset, your greatest tool, because you need to keep track of how you're going to get done all your work and make sure that's organized and prioritized. So you're addressing the most important stuff as soon as possible, even if it's the stuff you don't want to work on for that moment, but it needs to get done.
Awesome. Thank y'all. Appreciate that. All right. So for this final one, I want to make sure that we, get to some of the participant questions too. So let's do a quick lightning round of number 5, maybe a tweet. You have to tweet out one piece of advice to your past selves, or, so like, what is something you wish someone had told you that you didn't know before, before starting your job search process? So Jake, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, to sum it up, pretty much everything we've said here, like, it's been kind of amazing. We've all discovered these things in parallel. We get to share it because we didn't know any of this when we started. But one of the biggest ones is just knowing that, like, production is actually a super viable path for junior people in the industry. Like, for whatever reason, I had heard from a couple people in the industry, like, oh, that's something you get promoted into, or like, oh, you don't want to be in production, like, pick a creative discipline. But if you have a broad skill set and you know how to use it and communicate it, that's actually like a huge strength. And I spent too much time stressing on those bits of like, oh, well, what does it actually mean to look good on paper? And really, it's like just making sure that you're a trustworthy person and you can communicate that to people that will make them want to have you fill that role. And it's production seems hard to stand out for, or stand out and apply for, because it's not like super portfolio or hard skill dependent, but the trade-off for it is how much more of it is focused on communication and a broad understanding of development. So really knowing how to speak to all of the different issues that any team could run into well is like the biggest thing that'll make you stand out.
Awesome. Go for it, Alyssa.
When I was a student, I didn't know what being a producer was, even though that's kind of what I was doing. It absolutely is a viable path in the industry if you like seeing how the different pieces of development and how they come together and interact, and you're kind of a bit of like the glue that keeps things moving, and you're super important even though you don't have a lot of like tangible things that you can put in like a portfolio, for example. Soft skills are still very important and they make or break a team in a lot of cases. The one thing I would say is that you might not feel ready. You might be dealing with imposter syndrome. It's fake. And even if you feel like you really aren't there yet, you're not ready to apply to that job, it doesn't matter. Lie to yourself. Lie to yourself all the time. Just lie to yourself until you're confused, and then maybe you'll believe that you're ready. And spam out those applications because it's fine. It's not anything personal if you never hear back. Just rack up those rejection letters, keep a high score. That's what I did. And nobody really knows what they're doing. Like Jake said earlier, there's no formal process for making a game. Everybody's kind of flying by the seat of their pants constantly, and you're just going to be shocked by the time you get somewhere and see, like, oh my God, like what? This is how it's done? It's a miracle that anything gets finished and shipped, honestly. But it's beautiful also because it's such a creative and fun, dynamic place to be. But yeah, nobody knows what they're doing. You're fine. You are ready. You actually have a degree in this thing. You can do it.
True that. For sure. Thank you, Alyssa. All right, Daniel, go for it.
I'll sum up my thoughts in 3 points. Be insatiably curious. Like I think Jake hit the nail on the head that game development is knowing a lot about the cohesive, the holistic process, knowing a little bit about how art works, knowing a little bit how sound works, knowing a little bit about all of that works is super, super important. So just be curious. Just if you're talking to an artist and you're not an artist, just listen to what their struggles are, because a lot of your job is trying to solve problems. If you know these artists are struggling with this tool or this process or whatever, you're going to be so much more equipped to solve that problem for them, because the artists are not going to see the bird's eye view that you're going to see. So they can't see the entire thing. So you have that power. So you need to hear from them. I think second thing I'd say is that people are be very clued into what people are saying and what they're asking for, but be aware they may not always say explicitly what they need, and that you're going to have to read between the lines, because people are focused on their world that they're working in. That's all they're going to understand. So you need to listen to what they're going through, and then identify something that they may not have identified themselves, but you can see a fix for. And on a more technical level, on a job application for a resume and a cover letter, one piece of advice, please, whenever you're doing a resume or cover letter, make your resume or cover letter unique for each job you are applying for. If you apply for a job and they list out all these requirements, and if you have all those requirements, make sure your resume says you have those requirements, and explain how you've done them, how you've used them, and so on. Don't try to make a resume that's a one-size-fits-all, because they are looking through dozens, if not hundreds of applications. Make yours one where they look at it and be like, this person has exactly what we are looking for. Because you're never going to make a one-size-fits-all application. It's just going to fail at all of them. Make one that fits one job you're applying for, and to take more time, but the time will be worth it in the end. And same goes for a cover letter. Speak about the game that company works on in your cover letter. Do research into the company. Generic cover letters stick out so hard. I've been part of a hiring team recently at our company, and reading a generic cover letter versus one that was clearly written for the company just stands out. And I'd say the number of generic cover letters was like 90% of them. So if you're writing a cover letter that is specific to the company and it's clearly that's specific to the company and specific to the job responsibilities listed, that will stand out so much. So please do that. It'll make a huge difference.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So that was like our planned programming. So now we'll hop on over to some of the participant questions. And this is sort of like a free-for-all. So whoever wants to go ahead and answer the question, feel free to go ahead and speak. So the first one we have, so you guys kind of touched on these throughout when you were talking. So I'll not say all of them, but here's one. How do you separate work and home? In school, we're always taking our work home and working on hours. It can be stressful keeping all of the tasks and projects in your head all the time. So take whoever wants to go for that.
We handle it poorly, I'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's especially hard right now with the work from home. It's really, really hard because you don't even have the separation between office and house. Your office is your house. I'd say the best thing I can say is just give yourselves those hard deadlines and tell yourself after 6:30, I'm not working on any more work stuff. And that can be hard to say sometimes, especially if you're super busy and you have lots of stuff to do. But just sometimes making that cutoff and saying, I'm turning off Slack, I'm closing my computer, I'm just going somewhere else, and I'm not going to look at any of this stuff. I think that separation is super important. And I have to remind myself to keep doing that all the time.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think echoing that, I think another big part of it is communicating well with your teams when you're tuning off, even if you depending on how flexible your studio is, our hours are always kind of drop in, drop out. There's just the shared expectation of how much everybody's going to work. But being clear when you need time, or if you're running behind on things, especially, there's always more uncertainty than you can account for. And presuming you're just going to be able to make up for that lost time at some point, or pull the extra hours, it's going to be way more stressful and cause way more problems than just as soon as you're running a little behind, telling everyone on your team or telling your the people who are expecting things of you, and that way you can renegotiate those commitments.
Sure. Anything else?
Add on, it is really important to let your team know when you're feeling overwhelmed, because you don't want to wait until it's so bad where it's going to hurt the bigger picture or really bottleneck anything. It's totally fine for you to say, hey, I'm working on a lot of stuff today. This new request came in and it's going to take me a while, and I just want to let you know that's what I'm going to be doing all day today. And it's totally fine. It happens. It's part of the job. And we as producers, we handle a lot of scheduling, a lot of juggling, and it's totally okay to schedule in just time for you, especially when that time is not during regular work hours, because it's very, very easy to think to yourself, oh my gosh, I can do this if I work this much more than the regular amount of time. But and I'm guilty of that too. It's oh, I can't sleep, I'll just write 15 emails, it's fine. But you really shouldn't do that all the time. I remember in school, I was on so many things at the same time, and I'd be I can't meet on Saturday, I'm very busy, but Saturday I didn't have anything. So I would just that was my day to recharge. And you are the most important. If you are burned out, if you're overwhelmed, you're not going to do anything very well. So take care of you first. Make sure that you're resting. Make sure you're eating and sleeping and drinking water. And your team will understand when you do get overwhelmed. It's totally normal.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. All right. Next one. Maybe this one's hitting very close to home for 170 producers right now, but it's with the position of a producer, do you have an experience of someone who was not willing to do their work? Maybe how did you deal with that? And if you want to skip, that's cool too. We're going to have breakout rooms.
Yeah, for that happens a lot less in the professional environment. Often when that's the case, because we're pretty open with each other, we can see where challenges in people's personal lives are kind of starting to bleed in, and they're usually pretty honest about what kind of issues they're dealing with. In school, I found that was harder, where people would be facing similar issues, and that would be kind of what's getting in the way, but they wouldn't be willing to talk about it as much. I think as a producer, really the best thing you can do is be proactive in addressing that there's an issue, trying to help those people renegotiate what commitments they can make. sometimes in my 170 project, we had like 30 people. It's kind of a famously bloated team, but ended up making a big game. And a lot of the time that was like finding a role that made more sense for the time commitment that people were able to make, which is like, oh, well, if you feel like you're not going to be able to review everybody's like Git commits as like a more involved engineer, maybe you can work on our website. Like if that's development time that you feel like you have more confidence and familiarity over, even if it's not like your ideal portfolio position right now, just find a way to contribute that involves an amount of time that you can handle, and then you as the producer have to manage the scope around that. And in a professional circumstance also, you have to manage the scope around it, but you can also work with your leadership and the people involved to figure out like what amount, just how to address it in the project, like what things can be cut, which things can be shifted, if there's delays that can be allowed, other people you might be able to pull in from other teams.
Sure, awesome. Anyone else want to touch on that? Or should we go to the next one?
I'll just briefly add that I think if someone's not completing work, I think that it can be compared very similar to someone has sick leave or anything else that can kind of prevent them from completing work, and just see how your schedule can adapt to that. And hopefully you can do some predictions of saying, if this person's not doing work or has a very low output for these next few weeks, how's that going to affect the project? And then see how you can adjust based on that.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll add in a little thing. I guess I haven't really experienced this in a professional setting so much, but if you feel like somebody is not doing as much work, especially if there's a change and they were doing work but now they're not, it's okay. We say this in GDA, like life happens all the time. We're never gonna, you as a producer or a team lead should make it very clear and do your best to create an environment for your team where people feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I'm struggling. Hey, life is happening to me. Because especially when everybody else looks like they're doing fine and they're getting all their stuff done, they're not going to want to admit it. But it's normal and it happens, and you can't always plan for it. But we can say, this is probably going to happen to somebody, at least one person on this team. And if it's totally fine for you to try to reach out and say, I'm here if you need to talk to me about something. If you feel like something's happening that even if it's unrelated, you don't have to tell me details, but it's affecting your work, please, I hope you feel comfortable enough to speak to me about it so we can plan what's the best course of action moving forward. And it's not about them. It's not about people being lazy. You just never know what they're going through. And making people feel comfortable to be vulnerable like that with you really helps the team, and that really helps the project.
Awesome, thank you, Alyssa. Okay, so there's two of these, so I'll sort of combine them, but what are some resources that you folks turn to when looking for internship opportunities? Or similarly, are there any like specific job boards for games or game design or production? So I know, like, off the bat, I think really where, like, if I'm looking for a job, LinkedIn Jobs is like the main spot, as well as like maybe Gamma Sutra if I'm feeling, like exploring out there, as well as other sort of game like career sites, which I'm happy to share with y'all as the advisor of AGPM. I definitely know a few of them, but are there any specific ones that you guys might want to share?
No, I think you covered the big ones. There's going to be like kind of the general like query sites, but I think I'll kind of offer as a point to that I think always apply for everything you can see that come on some of those, but know that especially for recently been on the hiring end, know that sometimes the luck of the draw in that's going to be really random. Sometimes you can apply, you can see a job that's been posted for 9 months, and then you can apply, and then it turns out they're still looking for someone, you get something, and then sometimes the job goes up, and after 2 weeks it's down or something like that. So I think set up some of those notifications on these sites, set up like the pings or reminders for jobs and departments that you're interested in. And most of them have like LinkedIn can email you and whatnot, and a lot of them aren't going to be a good fit, but as long as you're aware of something when it goes up, and if you're knee deep in the job search, I think being prompt will be very helpful, because some places are looking for a job where, and especially if a place is going to get a ton of applicants, being in the first 200 will be a lot better than being in the next 800. So
Awesome. Cool. Sounds
The
good. Yeah.
only thing I don't think I heard mentioned is like just normal social media as well. Like Twitter, I feel like it can be really stressful to be on there, and I try to limit the amount of time I spend there and keep my profile relatively professional. But just a lot of like smaller companies will post about there first before even putting up a public one. Like, hey, is there anyone within my network or someone that can vouch for someone else? Or if you just want to reach out to me directly right here, we might have an opportunity for either a contract thing or the kind of more uh, flexible and uncertain positions. Like those can pop up super quick, and just making a more direct and kind of personal connection can help too.
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I think one thing I'll add too that I know for for someone who's like looking at like UX design and that sort of work for myself, it's like there's a UI Discord server. So sort of talking about communities and things like that. But there's a Discord server that has a bunch of professionals from different like areas of UX design, UI design. Where people like are just like straight up posting jobs. There's even like a resume critique / portfolio critique channel in there. So you're like the people that are hiring are also critiquing your portfolio. So that's a pretty good way to build up those skills if you're trying to put yourself out there. So definitely recommend that if you're interested. Like there's always some different ways to do that. Get involved with those different communities for sure. And I will attach the Discord somewhere later. I think you need to get an invite. So if folks want to join that, let me know, and I'll ask them admins to send me a few invites to share with y'all if you are curious about that, for sure. Okay, let's see. I think maybe one last question before we go into our breakout rooms. Yeah, let's see. This one. What sort of applications or programs, game engines, 3D modeling software, etc., should a producer potentially try to be proficient in? It might maybe not be any of these, but I'll let y'all take the floor on that.
Now you go. So my final interview for my job at 2K, they did not ask me a single technical question. Not a single one. I was like, oh my God, Nicole, my housemate, teach me Jira. And she sat me down and taught me how to do some stuff in Jira because I had never really used it, which is definitely something that you should learn if you have access to or a friend that knows how to do it, or at least watch some videos on it. But yeah, they didn't end up asking me anything. I think it just totally depends on the team. Even if the job description is the exact same between two different companies, that doesn't mean that the jobs are going to be remotely similar. In my case, all I had on my resume was like Google Suite, Microsoft Office, some art stuff that I knew how to do. Yeah, can you use Sheets? That might be good enough. Have you tracked things in like Google Drive for 170? Congratulations, you have managed a database. It's just like work with what you got. They know that you're just starting out and you're not going to have all these subscriptions to the fanciest tools. But reach out. People might know how to use stuff, and they can pass on information to you. And in the end, don't stress if you don't know how to use every engine and every software. It's okay.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah,
Go for it.
I'll agree with that. That I think it's. I didn't know anything about Jira when I started my job or applied. I use it now, but I don't think necessarily familiarity with the software is going to matter. The soft skills are really what matter for production, and you'll learn tools because different companies are going to use different tools. But on the question of tools, I'll just kind of share some of the tools that we do use, and I think having that knowledge will never hurt. But I think don't beat yourself up if you've never used Jira before. But I'll say that we use Slack. Slack is very formal nowadays for us. Jira. Basecamp is great for communication with external vendors, which is a lot of companies now is going to be a big part of their game development is working with external partners in one way or another. So Slack, Jira, Basecamp, Google Sheets, look into Google Scripts as well. I love Google Scripts, but you can do a whole bunch of stuff with a sheet and look into the formulas and stuff there. know how a Photoshop works. It'll be very nice. A lot of companies will have Photoshop. It's very good if you're making a modification to an image or giving an artist a mock. To be able to do it in Photoshop, just know how to do simple, like drawing lines on top of an asset or something will be very useful.
Sure. Cool. All right. So we are at time for questions, unfortunately. However, we are going to have breakout rooms for the next 20 minutes. So if your question wasn't answered, you will have the opportunity to ask it directly to one of the panelists. So the way that this is going to work is we're going to be put into randomly placed into 3 different breakout rooms. There's going to be 1 panelist in there and 1 moderator. So myself, Sophia, and Christina will be there as well. And essentially we're going to, if you have questions, you could raise your hand, or we'll sort of let y'all know how it's going to go, but we'll point out people and you could ask the questions directly to the panelists, and we'll go from there. Sound good?